Good morning, everyone. How was everyone's week? Oh, we had a normal busy week. And yesterday we got to play soccer. Well, I didn't. I watched it, and I was looking at the little countdown and saw all the soccer stuff. So it was fun. Um, so I saw that Farmington had their homecoming. Lots of things going on. The parade, and I know Central's homecoming's this coming week. I'm not sure when North County's is. Is your guys' this week or next week? I'm not 100% sure. That's always a fun time. We like sports in our family. So just it's a little bit different now that you're trying to keep away as much from people to watch those things. But it's still fun to watch. So last week we've been talking about the church and how they built a temple and how they finally got back into possession the Ark of the Covenant. And do you guys remember what was in the Ark of the Covenant? What there was something in there that they put in there, and that's why God found it so important, because God made this for them, made it actually for Moses. Well, for all of the Israelites, but gave it to Moses. Okay. And so that's what they were carrying, and they carried it to the temple being built. So do you remember? I'm going to give you a second. What is in the Ark of the Covenant? You remember? I'm really bad about waiting. And there's a delay, so. It was the Ten Commandments. So that's the rule God gave Moses on top of the mountain and on the stone tablets. And so that's what they kept in the Ark of the Covenant. That's why it's so important, because it has all those rules in there. So I just want to give you a little bit, because we've been talking about the different things in the church. The altar, we cleared off a space for the altar, right? And then last week we talked about making our special box, which is supposed to represent like the Ark of the Covenant. So we made our special boxes. And I'll show you ours in here in a little bit, okay? Because we made ours. But I'm going to read a little bit of different things that are made at churches and what they were to represent, which is pretty interesting. So, people have been building places of worship from the very beginning of time. Many people study the history of building churches. And here are a few things we know about church buildings. Steeples, do you guys know what steeples are? Those are like the pointy things. Sometimes there's a cross at the top, but they're real pointy. The top of the church, I should say. They have the steeples. They were built to point people to look up to the heavens. So like a reminder to look up to God. They were often the highest point in the cities and towns, so people could easily find the church by locating the steeple. I think that's really neat. So when you see the steeples, look at all the different church steeples and see how high they are. It's pretty neat. And I actually, when I go into a new town, I do notice that. Think about that. If you go to a different city or town, there are a lot of times that you'll be able to see the church steeple because it is the highest point, especially in the older towns that aren't really big cities and stuff that have the skyscrapers, but just the regular little towns. You'll notice that. Church bells are usually hung inside the steeples. The bell rings to tell people when it's time for church. Bells were also rung as a warning sign of a fire or if enemies were coming. So they did that a lot with wars and things like that too. The Revolutionary War, if you guys have ever studied that was used for that too. And then the stained glass windows, and at our church we have a lot of pretty stained glass windows. So if you'll ever pay attention, you can watch, sometimes they'll pan out. And I don't know, Adam, if you can do that. You don't have to do it right now, but like during church, if you could show that'd be neat for them to see. Because I know a lot of us aren't able to go to church right now. So to look for those. But stained glass windows are created with colored glass made with metallic. Stained glass windows became popular during the 12th century. They were thought to create heavenly light and to symbolize God's presence or spirit. The glass sometimes tells Bible stories, which ours do, and it helps people know the Bible, even if they cannot read. So they use those as pictures to represent different Bible stories. And we have a lot of those. We have one with the tomb being rolled away when Jesus rose. We have the woman in the well. Jesus talking to the children. I can't remember all of them, but we have different ones, different Bible stories representing ours, which I love our stained glass windows. Not just because they're pretty, but because they tell God's and Jesus' stories. So those are really neat. So pay attention to those. So we're going to get to the story. Today, when I read this, it's not going to be directly from, it is from the Bible, but it's summarized because it's going to be coming from 1 Kings chapter 6, verses 1 through 38, and chapter 8, 1 through 66. So I encourage you guys, it's a really long read, and I didn't want to take up all the time to read that, but I encourage you guys to look that up with your parents and go over that. Probably not in one day, but maybe throughout the week so you can get the breakdown of this story. So I'm just going to read a summary of what happened through 1 Kings chapter 6, verses 1 through 38, and chapter 8, verses 1 through 66. Oh, hello, guys. I see you. I see your stuff in there. About 480 years after the Israelites left Egypt, where they had been slaves, King Solomon began building a house for God. God spoke to Solomon about the temple the Israelites were building. God said, "If you follow my laws and keep my commands faithfully, I will live among you. I will keep the promise I made to your father David, and I will not abandon my people." The Israelites worked for 7 years to build God's house. Solomon wanted the site of the temple to be silent, so all of the work with tools was done somewhere else, and the pieces were brought to the site and set quietly into place. So I want you to think about that. Right now we're building a house, not a temple, but a house for us to live in because we're living in a camper. So it's very loud. A construction site is extremely loud. So think about all that. They had to go somewhere else to work, build things, build the stone, build the pillars, make all that noise somewhere else because he wanted it to be sacred and holy and silent. And they had to carry so they had not only had to do all that work away, they had to carry all that stuff to there and be very quiet as they placed it. And that would be hard to do. It's a neat idea, though. I like that. It was a magnificent building with carvings and gold. And I don't know if you guys have ever picked up gold, but that's heavy. After the temple was finished, Solomon gathered all of the people together. The priest moved God's sacred chest containing the 10 Commandments into the temple, and that is the Ark of the Covenant we talked about. Solomon said to God, "I have built you a glorious house, a place where you can live forever." Solomon stood before the altar praying and dedicating the temple. In his prayer, Solomon remembered some of the things God had done in the past. God delivered the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt. God chose Solomon's father, David, to be king of Israel. When David wanted to build a house for God, God promised David that his son would build the temple. So God promised that Solomon, which is David's son, would build it. Solomon knew God was bigger than the temple, greater, in fact, than any building. Solomon knew the temple was a reminder of God's promise to live among God's people. The temple was a place for God's people to gather together and worship. After Solomon dedicated the temple, he blessed all the people who were gathered there. He reminded the people that God had been faithful to them. He reminded the people to keep God's commandments and to be faithful to God. So church really isn't made to be a pretty place. It is pretty, but it's made to worship God and a reminder that God is with us. So even though there's all these nice and pretty things, we want to remember that it's just a building and we make up the church. So don't forget that. That church wouldn't have been built without all those people assisting for that. And same thing now, our church isn't ran without people's help, and we have to remember that as well. So I'm going to show you our ark because we made the Ark of the Covenant, and we're going to put it on our altar, and we have put it on our altar this week, and we're going to add something else to that this week, okay? So remember, the altar is a reminder that God is with us. The altar is a place for us to think about when we leave and come back to our home, to remind ourselves to pray to God and to worship God. So I'm going to bend down and grab this. Now remember, we made this box out of, like I said, we're building our house, and I'm not building it, but some people are. And there's some leftover nails and wood and some spray paint. So Liam had a good time with this. And this is our box. He found a chicken feather. No. So we spray painted the chicken feather on there, and that's our box. So he made that, and like I said, it could be any type of box. We can't open it because we didn't have hinges, so we're going to slip our special stuff inside, and that's where we're going to remember for the Ark of the Covenant. So we'll put that on the back on the altar. And what I want you guys to do in that is I want you to think of some prayers every day before you leave the house and write down a little special prayer for someone, and then you can slip it into that box on the altar. All right? And God will know your prayers, and then you'll remember to pray daily, and that's very important. The other thing I want you to add to your altar is a candle now. And the candle, do not light it unless your parents are around, because I don't want to hear about anybody burning anything. But the candle is, ask your parents first, but the candle's to represent that God is with us. We light the candles when we go into church to show that God's presence with us, and that's what we're going to do here. We're going to have a candle, our Ark of the Covenant, and then our altar, and we'll light that candle, okay? So that's what I want you to do this week. Write your prayers, put it in your box, and also have the candle and light that reminder that God is with us. God lives with us, among us. So our church is special. Everybody's church is special, but I want you to look around our church today, online. I know we can't go everywhere, but in the sanctuary, because you'll be able to see, they move the camera around. Notice the different special things. Think of the special people that go to our church, because we're all family. I call my church family as well. During this week, I want you to think about all your church family, and I want you to pray for them. Pray for them for different things. Everybody has, you can listen to joys and concerns. They all have struggles and joys, and you can pray for happy things and things that might be giving you a little trouble. So this week, I want you to think of your church family and all the special people in there in the church family and pray for them. Okay? So what we talked about, King Solomon built the temple. God had promised David, which is Solomon's dad, that he was going to build the temple. He built the temple. They put in a big box. Do you remember what that box is called? That they carried, it had something in it. Do you remember what it's called? That box. I'm going to wait a second. It was the Ark of the Covenant. They put that in there. And what's inside the Ark of the Covenant? The Ten Commandments. So they put the Ten Commandments in there. And that has the rules of what God wants us to follow. And they were quiet when they built this temple. They wanted it to be a sacred place to honor and worship God. And there's different things for the churches. We talked about the steeples to remind us where the church may be in town. They're the highest point usually. And that they have the bells to remind us when church is starting, or back in a long time ago, they used it for warnings about fires or enemies coming, like in wars. And they also have the windows in the church that tell stories of different Bible stories. So I want you to remember all those little things that we've built in our church and what they represent and how important our church family is. I just got a fun little question. If you guys were to build a temple, what would your temple look like? Would you have certain colors? Where would you put it? My big thing I would probably do is make it to where I love the outside and I feel really close to God when I'm outdoors. So I would probably make it to where there was an option where we could worship outdoors as well. I think that would be really fun. But those are some fun things to think about how you would make your church, just for a fun question. All right. So we're going to say our prayer, and we want to remember about the story of King Solomon building the temple and what the different things in the church represent. Okay? It's not just pretty things. There's a reason for those things, and to remind us of God and that God is with us. All right, we're going to bow our head and say a prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for our church family. Thank you for being with us always and help us to remember to pray and to worship you always. In your name we ask, amen. Oh, I saw that you have a blue church. That doesn't surprise me, Thaddeus. I bet that was you that put that. That's a good color. All right, guys, I will be on here next week. Remember to put your box on the altar, put the candle, and light it with your parents' permission, and that'll remind you to pray to God daily. Write it on paper, put it in your box, okay? You guys have a really good week, all right? Bye.